Hi everyone, sorry this video is late. I tried to get everything done before I left for my interview in Texas, and it must have slipped my mind that I didn't complete the video. So I'm going to go through the notes quickly. Again, I apologize that this video is getting up on Wednesday rather than up by Monday. So let's get started. Each of the readings tell you exactly where to stop on eCampus. I think my notes say that as well. So we'll start with the Eves and Leathers reading. So much of our nonverbal communication is translated across cultures. So we see a lot of the same facial expressions and muscle movements anywhere we go. So a smile is a smile here, as well as in Japan, as well as in Sweden, right? Very different cultures. And it means the same thing. But some of our gestures can mean different things. So there was a study conducted to understand facial codes across cultures in a US group and an Indian group. So the codes did include anger, fear, disgust, embarrassment, compassion, and amusement. So the Indian group and the American group recognize these nonverbal codes about the same percentage of time, right? So we could tell anger, fear, disgust, embarrassment, compassion, amusement. We could tell those easily across different cultures. But in vastly different cultures, such as Japan, nonverbal codes differed very vastly. Sorry, differed vastly. So shame is a very undesirable, it is probably the most undesirable emotion in all of the emotions that you could experience in Japanese individuals. And so because it's not an emotion that you want to see or you should see, many Japanese individuals couldn't correctly recognize shame. And then there are a few emotions and facial expressions that are universal, however. So like I said, a smile is a smile, doesn't have a separate meaning in other cultures. So while we don't have many universal emotions and facial expressions, there are some that are the same across cultures. So Americans are pretty good at recognizing and decoding most emotions. On table 14.1 on page 305, if you want to check that out with the reading, it shows all of the emotions. So with the exception of disgust emotions, so especially repugnance and distaste, contempt emotions such as arrogance, uh, determination, belligerence, and surprise, flabbergasted, and astonishment, Americans are pretty good at recognizing and decoding. And I know that seems like there's a lot of different emotions, but really, I mean, think about it. If somebody shows you a disgust face, what does that look like? We might not see that too often. And similar to how Japanese individuals don't see shame, we might not be able to tell the difference between flabbergasted and astonishment, right? Like, what do those even look like? Because we just say, hey, we're surprised. I always thought flabbergasted was a bad thing. Like, I feel flabbergasted, I feel frustrated. I didn't know it would go with surprise. So maybe it's we have different understandings. So that's why we're not good at that. And I'm not trying to make excuses. Some of us are just bad at decoding emotions, but Americans are pretty good. And this is due to the display rules in the culture. So um, any emotions that we see are based on display rules. So what is socially acceptable to display on our face in our culture, right? Is it acceptable to be out in public and just bawling your eyes out, to be that sad? Is it acceptable to be so angry that you're showing it? So, what are these display rules, and when are we allowed to, and how much are we supposed to show? There are some cross cultural differences. The most important is the gesture emblems, and they are often subject to misinterpretation. So, there are some similar gestures that we do across cultures that have very different meanings. So if you nod your head here in America, if I say, do you understand this? And you say, that tells me that you're in agreement, you understand this. Yes. But if you're in Japan, it means that they've just heard your message, not that they agree with it. So, do you understand this? Means, okay, I've heard your message. And then they respond with some sort of emblem, right? So, we have to be careful of these different gestures that we see. You can skip the chronemic section. We already covered this information. And then I just want to do a quick note on olfactics. So this is odor. How we are expected to smell or what we smell is culturally dependent, right? So the amount or type of smell, floral smells versus musk, cologne, perfume, it's based on the culture that you're in or from. So I know that typically here in America, we have scents that are very sex specific. So musk scents are typically masculine or male scents, and floral scents are typically feminine or female scents, right? So when we think of things, we're expected to have perfumes and colognes that are sex specific. Um, Several companies do try to create unisex fragrance, meaning anybody can wear it, but I don't know. They might not work or be bought as much. I don't know. I personally don't buy things that smell musky because I don't like them. So I wouldn't wear them. And then, of course, you can stop after olfactics on the top of page 315. Moving forward to Feldman and Tyler. So, age is an important factor when we're understanding nonverbal communication. Think about how different toddlers' nonverbal communication is than yours. You've learned, possibly even mastered some nonverbal communication skills, right? It is apparent in people as young as a few hours or days old, and infants imitate some facial expressions and gestures, but they're not masters at it like we are, right? We've been living with and working with nonverbal communication our whole lives. It started with an infancy. Think about when you were first learning to play a sport. You weren't a pro at it. You might have been good, but you weren't a pro. And so that's kind of how it is for nonverbals and infancy. So it's thought that because infants can distinguish faces, so your newborn can tell who you are compared to others, that they can distinguish between your nonverbal communication, so specifically our facial expressions. And this continues through adulthood, and we begin, or childhood, and then adulthood, and we get better at it. So let's think about times when we were kids and our mom would give us the look, right? We know what I'm talking about when I say this because this look meant stop, reevaluate. You don't want to be doing that right now, right? Maybe dads can do it too. I don't know. My dad just always looked scary. So he wasn't. He was a teddy bear, but he just looked scary. So they perfected it, and it meant you quit doing what you're doing or you're going to get in trouble. And so we've perfected these looks, and our kids or kids around us, they don't have to be our children, can distinguish what they mean. They're learning their nonverbal communication. So younger adults and older adults with more nonverbal. So as we age from childhood, we are better able to recognize, decode, and encode facial expressions and emotions better. It just takes some practice, and that's what we're doing. As we age into older adulthood, we tend to get worse at recognizing and decoding facial expressions and emotions, right? So older adults tend to live in a sad expression state, meaning their face typically shows negative negative facial expressions. Sorry. And they do tend to encode more negative or sad emotions than positive or neutral, meaning they are putting those out there. So they live in this negative emotion state. Body movements. For infants and children, they're much better at decoding body movements than they are at encoding them, right? So we can see that toddlers and infants can tell when we're upset, when we're sad, when we're what we're feeling, right? But they don't know how to make those body movements themselves. And so they're better at seeing it and recognizing it than they are at doing it. They can mimic body movements, but they're better at seeing somebody else doing them and understanding what they mean. With adults, younger adults are readily accessible to decode and encode body movements, but this is through years of practice, skill, and understanding. So it does become a second nature. Older adults are more susceptible for error in decoding body movement messages, right? Um, it's not that they're out of practice, it's just that they're not recognizing much of these movements anymore. So you can stop at this section in the middle of page 7. It does start to repeat itself. And then finally, we have Hall 2006. So there are distinct differences in nonverbal communication based on sex. So women typically rate higher than men in several areas, including smiling at others, expressive faces, gazing at others, hand gestures, interacting closely, expressive voice, laughing, having an encoding or expression skill, paying attention to cues, recognizing faces, and having a decoding skill. Men rate higher than women in a few areas as well, though, including touching oneself, having restless feet and legs, speaking with disfluencies, speaking loudly, using and ah, and interrupting others. And some of these inferences they've been observed in several studies, right? So it's not just, oh, we saw it once and it's a thing, right? They've been observed over time. And none of these are worse than the other. So some are good, some are bad, some can cause good things, some can cause bad things. So this is not to say that rating higher in one over the other is better. But think about how you see these in your organization. Which sex tends to pay more attention to the social cues? Who tends to speak louder? Who interrupts more? And it's not to say that these are the end all be all. We do see them observed in many cases. So moving forward, let's talk about sex differences in accuracy in nonverbal communication. So sending cues. Females are more accurate in sending social cues nonverbally. It could be the nature versus nurture. We're brought up to be that way. We don't really know. Noticing and recalling nonverbal cues. Females are more accurate at noticing and recalling nonverbal cues. It could be due to the fact that women associate names and faces more accurately than men do, possibly giving them an advantage in noticing and recalling their cues, right? They can remember these people, they know their name, they know who they are, and so they can remember what they were doing nonverbally. Decoding. Females are typically more accurate at decoding, and these stereotypes mentioned above and earlier are pretty accurate as well. We are taught not to trust stereotypes, but these ones are actually pretty accurate. So where do these differences come from? Cop-out answer, it's really difficult to say what behaviors mean to people observed, so we can't really place them in terms of intentions and motivations. But think about it. What motivates you to encode or decode social cues of others? Why do you want to take that time to understand what someone is feeling? We can't randomly assign people to categories based on sex. Biological sex is male, female, and we can't really randomly assign a person to either group. So studying it from an experiment standpoint doesn't really work. And gender identity is another story. There are so many genders and gender identities, and this is a social construct that doesn't have an agreed upon definition. So again, it makes it really hard to understand where these differences are coming from. However, based on biological sex, women might be better at decoding nonverbal cues and other concepts because they're more inclined to, due to a need to be nurturing, right? This is just a theory though, it isn't proven, it isn't anything that we can definitively say. Based on biological sex, men might excel in certain nonverbal cues and concepts due to power differentials. We might expect men to be louder, to be more restless, to interrupt more as part of a power move. Again, just a theory. So that is the video for this week, for week 10. Again, I just want to apologize that it has taken me so long to get it to you. Looking forward, let me grab my syllabus. Give me 1 second. Okay, it's popping up. All right. So looking forward, just the discussion post this week, of course, and then your last discussion post is next week. I think I'm going to cancel the readings for week 12 and week 13. You don't have discussion posts. I'll keep them up there, but if you want to read them to get a little more insight about the workplace, you can, but I'm not going to make notes or a video on them. Um, they'll just be at your discretion. So, week 12 and week 13, the readings are canceled. I want you to focus on getting your meeting set up with me and then doing your meeting week 13 and focus on your project. Okay? If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I will be available via email. And yeah, have a wonderful rest of your week.